Hi everybody, my name is Roger Kirwin and I own IkonSuspensionUSA.com. We import and distribute Australian-made Ikon suspension, and one of our very proud customers is Janus Motorcycles. I want to take you through a little bit and explain how suspension works, in particular reference to the Janus. Well, the unit that is supplied on your new Janus motorcycle is from the Ikon Basics range, which originally evolved from the world famous Koni motorcycle shock absorbers. And as I say, they're now manufactured in Australia under the Ikon brand. When we look at an Ikon shock absorber, if you look at the spring, you'll notice that the windings of the spring have three distinct spacing patterns. Now, a spring starts life as a long piece of steel rod, and then of course it's wound into the coil that you can see here. If we look at the Ikon spring, it's really quite unique. With these three different spacings that it has, it gives you a far more controlled and comfortable ride compared to springs which have equidistant spacings all the way. They're called linear springs. So with the Ikon tri-rate, you'll see at the bottom the coils are very closely spaced together, and then we have intermediate coils, and then you'll see that the coils start to get wider. Now when you hit a bump in the road, the whole spring compresses to absorb the shock. And of course, you probably figured out by now that's where we get the term shock absorber from. Depending on the severity of the bump or the dip in the road, you'll find that these lower coils here are designed to actually touch each other, close up, forming a solid piece of steel for just a fraction of a second to allow these more widely spaced coils to rebound the shock back to its original length. So if we go over to a Janus motorcycle, let's have a look at the new Gryffin 250. It's a unique setup we have here. It's a leading link, and of course we have the Ikon suspension on the front as well as the rear. So we can see now that when the motorcycle's front wheel hits that bump, the wheel will travel upwards, the spring will compress, and depending on that severity of the bump, these coils will come into play if needed. The actual damper body, which is the chrome part of the shock that you can see here, contains suspension fluid, and it has a piston, rather like you would find inside the engine of the bike, but obviously much smaller. And as the shock compresses and expands, the piston, which is attached to this chrome rod, moves up and down inside this tube. A nice feature of the Ikon suspension used on the Janus is the fact that inside this outer tube, there is an inner tube with a gap between the two, and that's where the suspension fluid lives. As the piston is moving up and down, it is drawing fluid from this reservoir between the two tubes up into the middle of the inner tube, so the piston can draw fluid and push it out all the time. This means that there is always suspension fluid providing damping no matter what the road conditions are. Now, a great feature about the Ikon suspension that's fitted to the Janus is these are fully rebuildable shock absorbers. That means, say, down the road in years to come, let's say you had a seal which is leaking. For most OEM shock absorbers, it's time to put it in the dumpster and go out and buy a new pair of shocks. In the case of the Ikon shocks, you just replace the seal. In fact, the whole shock absorber, there's a part number for every component on this. If you ever needed to do a full service or a rebuild or something, you just buy the parts that you need. You've probably noticed these rubber bungs which are located on the shocks. These are actually called bump stops, but in actual fact, think of them as an insurance policy. If you hit some severe bumps in the road where the whole shock is slamming down and compressing, this is a rubber buffer which prevents metal-to-metal contact. So, the only thing left we want to talk about now is the actual springs themselves. And we use a particular gauge which is fitted to the Janus, but say you were going to be doing some touring and carrying a lot of heavy luggage or passenger or whatever, then we can also supply heavier rated springs to fit onto the shocks on your Janus motorcycle. So that's a little bit of information with regards to how Ikon suspension works. And indeed, I know Ikon in Australia is very, very proud to have Janus as a customer. So enjoy your Janus and enjoy the comfortable and improved ride that you get from Ikon suspension.